The increasing success of online sources for news and information has really redefined what we understand as news. When we look to the past, say 10, 20 years ago, people would get their news once a day. They might read a morning newspaper or an evening newspaper, or people might get their news from watching local TV news in the evening. So there was a daily news cycle that structured the atmosphere within which we got our news and information about current events. Well, now the internet and online sources of news have really undermined that whole news cycle process. Now, news and information is available to us online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that a story can be updated at any moment of the day or night. And we don't wait anymore to get our news from the morning newspaper or any other media outlet for that matter. And news organizations, newspapers in particular, are grappling with this new cycle for news and information, this quickened pace where news can be breaking or posted at any one moment. Now, this has really changed the sources that are used for news stories. As I've pointed out previously in the past, news stories were really heavy with sources that were considered to be authoritative sources of news and information. So news stories would rely heavily on what police, government officials, business executives would have to say. Now that everybody is blogging, everyone is posting information online, and everybody is taking cell phone pictures that are posted online. Now a broader range of people are used as sources for news and information. And I think to some extent that's a really good thing, because it makes the process of journalism much more democratic by being more inclusive in terms of getting news and information, not just from the powerful, but from anybody who is online or who has an iPad or iPhone or smartphone. Now, there's some downsides to this as well, because it's not just all of the benevolent and kind-hearted that are increasingly contributing to news, that now we rely on gossip sites like TMZ to provide us with information and unconventional sources for news. And a lot of times these online sites, especially the gossip and scandal ones, don't really have a great code of ethics. So it really raises some questions about, what are the sources for news and information, for news that's reported and distributed online, and how authoritative are all of those sources. Can we trust the information that we're getting from TMZ or the National Enquirer online, and how do we evaluate these sources of information? So the news hole of a newspaper is the percentage of the paper's content that is devoted to news and editorial copy, like opinion pieces, sports, and so on. The news hole makes up roughly 35 to 50% of the content of the newspaper. I think that's a very interesting figure because the flip side of that is that means that at least half, maybe 2/3 of the content of a newspaper is devoted to advertising. All right, and now that I think raises some I think important questions about the relationship between news and advertising in a newspaper, and can we say that there is this kind of clear and hard fast wall between the news that's reported in the news sections and the ads and the advertisements that are in other sections of the paper. I guess one question that some critics have that I wanted to mention is some critics argue that historically there's been a very uneasy relationship between the news section of newspapers and advertising, and that every so often advertisers for newspapers exert real influence and control over the content of the news that's covered in a newspaper. So, for instance, let's say that a local car dealership is a major advertiser for the Hartford Courant. Well, what impact is that going to have on reporters for the Hartford Courant when they're covering stories related to car dealerships or ethical practices by dealerships? Some critics argue that historically this dependence on advertising has made journalists and reporters and editors reluctant to cover stories that might in any way criticize the activities of these advertisers. So real questions about the way in which advertising might act as a censor of information and news provided in newspapers. And again, some argue that newspapers have done a pretty good job resisting this pressure by advertisers, and that really good editors and reporters will cover stories without regard to who is advertising in the other pages of the newspaper. But I think it does lead to an open question, which is what kind of impact does this kind of advertising have on the journalism practiced by newspapers? One of the things that we've seen in this survey of American media is that there's a fairly high degree of concentration of ownership in many media sectors, and newspaper publishing has been no exception to that trend. When we look historically at the newspaper business, a majority of big daily newspapers have been owned by a small group of companies like Gannett or Knight Ridder. In newspaper publishing, these companies that own lots of newspapers across the country have been referred to as newspaper chains. And throughout their history, these chains have been criticized for contributing towards a kind of homogeneity and sameness in American newspapers. That is, some critics have argued that if you look at newspapers owned by Gannett across the country, that they all tend to have a very similar look and style to them. They have a similar approach to reporting. A lot of times the same reporters and journalists are featured in Gannett papers simply because Gannett would hire their own reporters and then have the reports or articles by these reporters included in all of Gannett papers. And these newspaper chains would also stuff their newspapers with lots of cheap syndicated material, advice columns, Dear Abby, horoscopes, celebrity gossip, and so on. Now, that said, the advocates of these chains argue that historically they played a vital role in keeping daily newspapers afloat, that companies like Knight Ridder and Gannett have the financial resources to bankroll and finance the operations of newspapers. Now, as this chapter gets into, in the last 20 years or so, daily newspapers have had a really tough time of it, and their economic fortunes have darkened. Newspapers have fewer readers, their subscribership has gone down, and as a result of that, newspapers are able to generate less advertising revenue, and of course then their overall revenues and profits have gone down. Because of all that, on the economic scene, newspapers have become much less attractive businesses, and as a result of that, there's been a lot of selling off of newspapers, where chains have increasingly shed their more unprofitable papers, and these papers have been bought up by other companies that have little or no background in newspaper publishing. And some critics have argued that these other companies that are outside of the news business, that have bought up these newspapers, are strictly interested in the bottom line. They want profits. And as a result of that, these companies have been slashing expenses, really laying off journalists, editors, photographers, really cutting expenses to the bone, and even more putting more cheap syndicated features in their papers. So some really wonder whether or not these new companies really have a commitment to providing good quality journalism.